Hello. Don't know who's on. Can anyone hear me? Kurt, can you hear me?
Hello, Mike. If
Cool.
you're speaking, I can't hear you.
Oh, you can't hear me. Okay. How about that? Does that
There
work?
it is. Yes, I can hear you.
Good. So I often have problems sharing with Zoom. So I've actually sent Dave my slides. Could I just try now, see whether it works or not?
Of course.
Okay. So
Let me make you. We'll try it, and then I can see. If not, I can make you co-host.
okay. I don't. That's not the problem. I think it's a problem with the. A problem with Zoom and Linux.
Oh yes.
What's the best way to do this? Let me have a look. Have a think.
Yeah, I'm seeing something.
You are seeing something?
Well, it's trying to share. It's not actually showing anything that you're sharing.
Yeah, no, you tend to get just grey, which isn't very helpful.
Right. Yeah,
okay,
that's where
fine.
we're at.
Let's cancel that. If you could stop me sharing. So I don't know how to do that. Oh. Oh, it's got very
That
upset.
is a good question.
I think I'm gonna have to leave and then maybe come back. I can't even gotta do that. Huh.
Yeah, I'm not seeing how I can unshare
Okay,
you.
stop share.
Oh, there it
we
is.
go. Okay, Dave, I sent you the slides. Are you happy to do that? Because we just tried it and it failed as usual.
Yeah,
Thank you
I got
very
them.
much.
I don't have them open, but I have it sitting on my desktop, so I can easily open it here.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much indeed.
Not that one. Logging and confidentiality.pdf, right? Yeah. All right, let me share my screen here so I can share the regular slides and verify yours. All right, that's the correct deck, yes, for you?
Yep, that's it. Lovely, thank you.
Okay.
Brilliant, thank you. That's very helpful. Hi, Dan. Hi, Eric. Hi, Giuseppe. Here. Hi, Steve. Hey, everyone. Basically, lots of people joining. It's good. Good morning. Afternoon. So I have one of those. I was at KubeCon earlier in the week.
Nice.
In Valencia. It's very nice. Even went swimming in the sea. You've had a bit of time for a brief swim in the sea. It's very nice. But
I was registered virtually and attended one of the co-located events on Monday.
Oh, cool. Which one did you go to?
The eBPF, Cloud Native eBPF Day.
Oh, yeah. Was it good?
Yeah. They had a bunch of technical glitches there since it was the first day at a new venue and things, and so the live stream had various issues. They didn't.
There were some issues. I was at
WASM
WASM Day for the Monday, and there were some issues there as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, so my flight was horribly delayed. It was due in about 10 o'clock in the UK, and then it's delayed, and then it's diverted to the other side of the country. We landed, and then they refueled, took off again, and brought us back. So I didn't actually get home till about 10 to 4 in the morning, but luckily I actually get a decent amount of sleep, but it wasn't what I needed, honestly.
So that was the return flight?
That was a return flight.
But you got there okay.
Yeah, no problem getting there. But yeah. Heading home.
You guys caught my keynote?
No, sorry.
Okay.
I had so many meetings. How'd it go?
Well, it was virtually, so guess it went well.
Good.
I can see how we're doing on quorum since we have a good set here. I already see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Did I count that right? We already have quorum. Okay, so let's go ahead and start. All right. Thanks all for joining us at the TAC meeting today. Just as our usual reminder, we try to have this be an open, welcoming meeting where everyone participates in collaborative discussions centered around encouraging open source projects. Every project meeting our criteria is welcome. We hope this is a good experience for everybody. Thank you for coming. This is covered by the Linux Foundation's antitrust policy. In case you haven't read this recently, linuxfoundation.org/antitrust-policy. That, by the way, Kurt, I've not made any changes to the slides. I don't know if we'll need to as we go along, but right now they're just as you created them. Thank you for doing that again.
I have made a couple of changes. I did add the Brazian approved and
Okay,
a couple of
Yep.
tweaks.
Okay, excellent. Yep, I just opened it directly off the share. Thank you. So this is our current order here. So Mike has the tech talk, which is scheduled for at least 30 minutes. If it goes long, I think that's okay. So if we have good discussion, please feel free to comment and to make productive use of the topics, thoughts and things. So otherwise, is there any agenda bashing? This order look okay to everybody? So then we will go on. Let me verify our quorum here. I've seen Giuseppe. I'm assuming that Tate is acting as the alternate, as the voting rep from Ant Group today.
Yes, Dave Zongminggu has left Ant Group, so I will replace him. So you
Okay.
can remove him.
All right, you are the new, representative. Thank you for the notice.
Okay.
And Zongmin has left Ant Group. Okay. Do you happen to know whether he is involved in the confidential computing field at all anymore?
Oh, he's still in this field. Actually, he moved to Intel.
Okay.
Sorry.
So he may still come to a CCC TAC meeting, but not on behalf of.
Yeah. He may still
Okay.
come.
So can you send Kurt your email? Or actually, Kurt, you already have Tate's email, so we can put it on the slide here.
I can type in the chat.
Okay. Okay, so Kurt, if
Yeah,
you can
I'll fix
update
that.
All right, cool. All right. Let's see. Anybody from ARM here yet today? Or Facebook or Google? And I think everybody else is here. Howard's here, Dan is here, I'm here, and Lily's here. So we do have quorum since we have 6. Is there anybody who is new? I think I recognize everybody on the call right now as having been here multiple times. I think the newest person on the call is probably Mark, and Mark's been here a couple times, so I think we're good.
Okay, no more introductions from me.
No, you need no introduction now. Everybody knows you.
Fantastic. I'll tell my boss that.
All right. So for minutes, I'm going to flip over the pull requests and walk through the status here because we've got 3 of them out there. So the first one, let's see, do I already have this one open? Let me go back. So this is the 7th here. Looks like Kurt, you just resolved a couple things. So let's see.
Yeah, those have been resolved
Okay.
for a while. I think
Okay.
that one's good to go. The
Right.
21st, we have some open.
Yeah. So this one, I think we were ready to approve this last meeting, but we didn't have quorum at the time. And so we've already
Right.
got, Dan and I have approved this one. And so it's been long enough that I'm hoping everybody that would vote on this one has had enough time to. Out of the voting members, is there anybody that would need amendments to this one or needs to abstain on this one? Going once, going twice. All right, we will consider April 7th approved. The next one is the 21st. There are a couple of open points on here that haven't been addressed yet. And so I don't think this one is ready to approve yet, correct?
Yeah, I have the edits to do on that one yet.
Okay, so you still have the action items. We won't call this one for a vote because there's already people that have voted not yet. All right, and then the third one is the ones that I was just reviewing right before the call, and I got to the end right before I joined here. So this one, I had a question. There's an also participating section, which is right below the attendees. Do you know what that means? Should we just remove that section, or does it actually have a meening?
It That's where we put, that's usually where we put guest speakers and Linux Foundation staff.
But they would actually be attendees.
Yeah, we can do that as well.
So, okay, I don't have a strong preference either way. I just didn't know if there was a meaning to somebody who was participating but not attending.
Yeah, well, I guess it's meant to show that, you know, we're not members of the TAC, but also participating.
Everybody on the attendees list is not members of the TAC, but also participating.
Fair enough.
My point, Kurt, is that all Linux Foundation employees and stuff are welcome to participate in all technical discussions, just like everybody else is. You guys are all welcome too. It's not just because you're employees; you're people too. We recognize that you have technical opinions that we value. So
I appreciate that. This is another one of the inherited things, and you know, I'm perfectly willing to change this however you all would like it.
Okay, I don't feel strong.
Do we want to put out a press release? Linux Foundation members, people too. Would people vote on that as a TAC? I don't know. That sounds like a governing board thing for me.
I mean, aren't Linux Foundation members like corporations? I mean, I know there's this whole thing in the US, but
yeah.
They
Okay.
have almost as much of a right to a vote.
Only after a few cups of coffee.
This one is also just a general statement that I put on multiple minutes. That's the only reason I'm going to spend a second on it now. Is, you know, we put slides in the, we check in slides in the same directories. I'd like us to get into the habit, and I did this in a previous pull request. Sorry, not a previous pull request, but a previous, you know, change where I put the thing in there and you accept it on a previous set of minutes. To actually put the link in here so that when somebody clicks onto the minutes here, they can just click through into the slides, not have to happen to know to just look in the same directory and things. And so
I completely agree, and I will start doing that.
Okay. And then the last couple sets of minutes, if I go back to like the 7th that we just approved, it only had Stephen and Zong Min. And then later ones had reverted to earlier copies that had Eric and Mike still in this action item. And so I think in both of the last two, we need to update them because those people have done their action items. So. Okay. Those are the only things that I spotted. Otherwise, this one looks good to me. So I don't know how this one was posted, I think 8 days ago. Other voting members, have you had a chance to review this, or do you need to defer this until next meeting? Is there anybody else that needs more time to review this? As for things like this one, we can commit the suggestion if we all agree, right?
Of course, yes.
Yeah. Okay. And the other ones are not, that one's easy to commit to. That one's a typo. That's a grammar. Okay. Just because I would love to call this one to a vote if we can just accept the things here.
Let's see, we had chat.
Yeah.
Wasn't that the May 5th? So I have to abstain. Oh, okay.
Okay. These are ones that are pure editorial and the minutes are accurate as they stand. And so I'm happy to vote yes and then do this change afterwards if people want. Because these are not things that I would hold my vote and say no on just because there's no link to the slides or there's an also participating section. So I'm fine voting yes on this one now. Is there anybody else that needs more time? All right, then out of the voting members, is there anybody that would vote not yet or abstain on the 5 minutes?
I mean, I have to abstain, I think, as I said in the chat.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Lily. Anyone else? Okay, let that vote be recorded that these minutes are also approved. And Kurt, I'll let you deal with adding a link here and also participating. But for the minutes, you can consider these ones approved.
Will do.
All right, then back to our agenda. Next up, we have our special guest star, whom probably all of you know. And so, Mike, I'm going to flip to your slides, and you can just tell me, next slide or whatever. If you want. So,
cool. Thank you. Hi, everyone. If you saw this at FOSDEM, I'm sorry, it's going to be pretty much the same. So, apologies for that. But hey, hopefully there's some new stuff that not everyone's aware of. So, logging and debugging and error management are, for hopefully fairly obvious reasons, rather tricky when you're trying to do them in a confidential computing environment, in a TE, because firstly there's you're restricted in some of the ways that it's possible to get access to data. And secondly, you often don't want access to data to be possible. So what I spent some time about was trying to think about some of the issues here. And this is not the be all and end all. This is some initial thoughts. And I want to generate some discussion. So what I've tried to do is lay out a framework of thinking about it and to encourage us to discuss around that. And I don't expect that we're going to come to a decision or that there is even one specific decision, but I wanted to, as I said, to spark some discussion. So let's move on to the next slide. So yeah, here's the agenda, some assumptions, some definitions, all of which people may disagree with, but I had to have some, so that's where we're starting. Then some stuff about life cycle, because I think it's important. Description of the problem, and we take it from there. And this is an introduction. I did write a more detailed treatment at that blog post there. You're very welcome to look. But again, there's loads more work that needs to be done in this area. And I think that the TAC is a very good place to be considering some of this stuff. So I would encourage us to do that somehow. So next slide, please. So some assumptions, and again, I think most of these will be common for many people, although not necessarily. First one's we're just not trusting the host at all, apart from the CPU and the firmware. The next is that we care both about application and data protection. And I know that's not always the case in our definition, but I know that most use cases we care about this. I think if you don't, then there's some changes that you can make here, but that's the basic starting point. I don't talk about attestation particularly. Attestation is always important, but it's just there had to be a scope, so I've kept it out generally. And the other thing is that, you know, it's not just logging. There are times that we actually need debugging output. So we need to think about what that means in a confidential computing environment, because I don't know about you, but I rarely write perfect code. And I suspect that's true of not only us, but our customers and our partners, etc. So we need to think about allowing people to debug stuff and what that means. Cool. So next slide, please. Okay, and next. So this is a very specific view of the world, and it happens to be pretty similar to the NOx view of the world, but I hope that it's mostly generalizable. And some different approaches will collapse some of these, and some of them may have a bit more, but I hope that I've come up with most of the pieces that might be there. So on the left, we've got what I'm going to call a client. That's something which wants to talk in some way to one or more of the pieces on the right, and all the pieces on the right are in a host. The things in red boxes are outside the TE instance boundary, shall we say, however you think of a boundary. And there's some stuff at the bottom which is host supplied, i.e., you know, just the standard stuff and OS, hypervisor, etc., etc. But also, we're assuming that there are actually some pieces which are supplied as part of the TE environment, shall we say. Bits which sit outside the TE and talk to things inside the TE. So I'm very aware that I'm somewhat bastardizing some of the work that Eric Voigt has done here, and I'm very sorry about that, but I had to have something, and this is kind of where I went. But as I said, I think most of it's generalizable, so I'm really, really sorry, Eric, if I've done horrible things to you. So and again, okay, thumbs up, thank you. So on the left, we've got pieces that are going to be caring about loading up a TE inside and outside the TE, and on the right, the actual execution pieces. And they are separate or maybe separate, or their functions may be separate, and that's where I set them out. And then a runtime, and then an application. Again, you may collapse the application, the runtime, but again, it may be they have separate requirements, and so having them separate, I think, is a useful thing. And as I said, it kind of fits the NOx way of the world, but that's unsurprising given that I'm an NOx guy. So any questions around this before we carry on? Is this kind of clear? Okay, let's move on to the next slide. because this is about time. And I said that there are some things, which have different life cycles. So I'm assuming that the host exists for all of the time that we're doing anything. But in the bottom piece, we have the TE loading component, which starts before the other pieces. Of course it does. And that is about loading the other pieces. And we assume that the internal and external piece start at pretty much the same time. And they either sort of complete as the execution starts, or they may overlap for some of the time. And once we actually get in the internal execution stuff, then we have the runtime, which loads an application. Again, your mileage may vary slightly here, but if we take it from the starting point, I think we can mainly generalize. Again, everything clear to everybody? I really want this to be one of those presentations where people pipe up with questions. Some of them I'll say I deal with that in the next slide, but some of them I won't. And I want to make sure that I'm not, that this isn't confusing, because it's just my view of the world, or a particular view of the world, shall we say. Okay,
just so that you can get some discussion and feedback, I wanted to comment in this that I think this is right. It makes me remember a discussion we were having in the IETF in the early days of the TEAP working group. The TEAP working group we talked about last TAC meeting, where, and that example, we had David Wheeler from Intel was one of the people that was part of the editing team, and we were having this conversation about what the SGX TEE was. And the discussion centered around, there's actually two different ways to view what the TEE is as far as the timeline goes, right? You could think of the TEE, one view, which is not the one on the picture here, and the one that people kind of started with before David Wheeler chimed in, was that the TEE was referring to the SGX part of the processor, right? And so it's permanently there, right, in that sense, because the hardware is permanently there. And he said, well, actually, the way that you can think about one way to view the TEE in an SGX world is that every enclave is a new TEE. Okay, it's just a different way of viewing it because it meets all the same requirements regardless of which definition that you use, right? If you think of every enclave as being a separate TEE, which actually matched one of the pictures we had in the TEAP spec, and he said, well, if you view it this way, your picture is right, right? And so in this timeline here, right, where you show TEE loading, that same timeline, when you have multiple enclaves, right, you have multiple TEEs running in that worldview of what a TE is. And so at different times, right, there's different overlapping ones. And so your little TEE loading one can happen multiple times on the same processor, all overlaid. So there's another level of depth to this picture that you're showing here. So I just try to reiterate that because it makes me realize that, on things you can have a dynamic number of TEEs if you view it that way. So
yeah, and I tend to talk about TE instances.
Yeah.
Exactly to avoid that sort of inconsistency or confusion. Okay, that's great. Thank you, Dave.
But the timeline, the point is the TEE loading is really a TEE instance loading using that terminology.
And it's, it's an interesting point because I oftentimes think of the TEE as the hardware. To your point, it's the stuff that's built into the CPU. The enclave is the software construct that's created and you put code into and put data into. And maybe we just use that vocabulary because it's easier to keep the two separate when you're talking than having, hardware. But it all comes down to definitions, which maybe that gets into our later conversation today.
And one of the important things here is that stuff which is in the red boundary is untrusted from the point of view of the TE instance. Stuff which is in the green or not shown in the boundary here is generally considered trusted. And again, trusted by whom for what? If only there were a book on that. But yeah, fine. Let's move on to the next.
Before you move on to the next, or actually, you can do it on this slide too.
Okay, fine, Eric. Yeah.
A couple things. I like where you're going here. One of the reasons I like TE instance loading is that there's going to be plenty of times you're loading the enclave with code and data independent of the loader, the TE loading thing. So the fact that you're loading an instance matches to the evidence that you're actually going to be verifying. You're not really often going to be able to verify what's loaded later. So that's one reason I like that comment that came earlier. The other question that original one I was going to bring up was the difference between runtime and application. I know that the runtime obviously is stuff that is going to be unpacked from what's being loaded and then executed. Is the application different in the data? Because I was imagining the data being there.
Let me explain how NARCS thinks of this, and that will, I think, explain why I think of it this way. But it doesn't need to be this way, as I think I try to explain. But it's important to understand it. So in the NARCS world, we have a runtime which is completely separate from the application. So it's a generalized thing, which is a known reproducible build, and it is measured. So all the stuff south of the application is measured, and only after that attestation is validated is the application loaded. So you're only ever adding an application into an attested runtime, so a known safe environment. So that's why we have the separate thing. So the runtime is stuff that might be provided by let's say a confidential computing provider, and they might load an application from an ISV, as an example.
All right, makes complete sense. It might be worth
other things in your diagram, Eric, right? A secure world kernel would go in there, Opti, for example, in a trust zone thing, not in an INARCS example, but there's other things that would be in that same category that I think fit into the diagrams that you have in the white
Yes,
paper.
absolutely, Dave.
And that's perfect. I don't have any problem with that. The question of if I'm asking maybe another word along with runtime to help dimension what it is, will head off another question on this, because the runtime here is specific to the purpose that allows the application to run. I don't know if it's libraries or what, but runtime might be a little brief for that one.
It is, and you can cut it so many ways. And in fact, the T
for now, I certainly understand what it is, so we can keep going.
The T execution and the runtime in the NARCS world are actually pretty much the same thing. But again, so it depends how you cut the cake, and I wanted to, these are exactly the conversations that I really want to have. And I'd love to, be refine this further. So
because in the NARCS world, right, going back to your timeline, right, the application starts at a much later time than the runtime, because in the meantime, you have that attestation step and, the conveyance of the actual application to the actual TEE goes across the network, right? And so.
Indeed. And we don't actually have a separate process for TE loading in the way you might think in all cases. So, but they are separate functions, and therefore I think deserve to be separated out as components, because they have different, you'll see as we go through that there are some different things to think about, properties and concerns. So okay. Cool. So just a bit more information on this one. So, let's go back a bit. So the problem is that all components may need to communicate information to various other components. Logging data is special because you don't want it necessarily to go to certain people. It may have sensitive information about it. Debug data is sometimes needed, as I mentioned before. And also there is a concern that untrusted host components can infer information from logging or debugging data if they have access to it. And that could be anything, from what the type of the application is to cryptographic keys that are being used within it, for instance. Let's carry on. Okay, so some of the things that we can do to help ourselves and consider it is, firstly, just minimizing messages. The fewer messages are passed, the less inference can be made. The second is thinking about restricting messages that go across the TE boundary, and I'll talk about that in some detail a bit later on. Another thing, of course, is that we do have some tools in our toolkit. We can encrypt things. That is useful, and that generally provides us with integrity and confidentiality. I know that depends on the crypto scheme, but I'm just making that assumption here. And also we have hashing or signing, which gives us integrity. And both of these are useful toolkits as we go through. So let's carry on. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is step through the different components. And I'm going to try not to spend too long on this, because I think most of you folks know this already. But again, we can always refer to these. So from the bottom, host supply stuff is untrusted, and we assume that it can change or interfere with all logging and error messages to which it has access, and it may use them to infer information about the workload. the application and the associated data to do with the workload. So that's the first thing, and that's bad. We don't trust it.
So when you say,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, when you say interfere, can we be a little bit more precise about like, so there is tampering, there is misordering, there is also probably message hiding, like swallowing,
You can
right?
delay
Like
and
what?
you can replay.
Yeah, and or you can just stop things going at all.
That's a indefinite delay. Yeah.
Yeah. Those, yes, indeed, Mark, those are exactly the sort of things. I didn't feel I wanted to list all of them, partly because I wasn't sure I'd cover all of them, but I think those are pretty much all of them. Because it has access to everything that it can see, and that is the assumption. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I guess the thing is, if we list them, then we can be a little bit more precise about knowing that we've dealt with them.
I know, and that's exactly the sort of thing I'd like to come out of this this presentation. This was, you know, for FOSDEM, for people who didn't necessarily know confidential computing very well, and I don't have all the time I'd like to do. So, and if you, in fact, look at the blog post, there is a little bit more detail. I can't remember if I do list all of them, but yeah. And you know, if for instance the TAC decided they wanted to create a white paper around this, and we think it's useful to do so, then I would hope that we would, you know, make sure that we do craft all of these things and make sure that we list as many of them as we can think. I'm not saying we should do that, but if that is appropriate, that's fine. Okay, let's go on to the next one. So moving from the top, the application. So we're going to assume that we have a data layer and a control layer, and we'll talk about this again. These are difficult things to define, but let's say that mainly it wants to talk, it's something like an HTTPS server, right? And the client is going to be talking to this application and vice versa. Assuming that it has networking and it has some keying, it can communicate over to that client. It may also choose to provide error messages to the runtime as well as the client. It may want to say to the runtime, you know, I feel that I'm being throttled, or I don't have access to networking, or the storage is taking longer than I think, or just frankly, I haven't been able to load up correctly. Some of hashes I'm expecting to be correct and not so. So it is able to communicate out and down. And this is one of the reasons I order things as I did. Generally, you can go sideways or one step down, but not further than that, generally. All clear? Cool. Let's talk about the runtime then. Next slide. Okay, so there's an assumption here. And again, this isn't typically the way Anox works, but I think there are occasions when you might want to do this, where actually the runtime may be able to communicate to the client via some sort of control plane. So, if you're doing an orchestration, some orchestration pieces here, it may be the runtime is what is talking to the client and is doing the setting up of the application, or that maybe if the application is sending errors down to the runtime, it is the runtime which is talking to the client rather than the application doing error messages type things. And so that which brings us to the second bullet, which is it may have access to some messages from the application. Now, generally, I think my view would be that the runtime shouldn't be reporting information to the host components. And that if you want to do that, that should happen over a control plane, and the client should be the one which makes decisions about whether to communicate information to the host. Because the client, I think, generally is expected to have more information about what is safe to do so and what is relevant to do so. Okay, so does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, fine. Let's move on to the next one then. So this is the TE loading the internal parts of it, and the naming of these is awful, and I apologize. And again, something I'd love to improve. So this is the bit, remember, that loads up everything else in the green box. Basically, it's the thing that starts all the different pieces. So it may be sensitive to false error attacks. There's nothing to stop the pieces which are untrusted that would typically be the TE loading external piece or the host applied pieces, from trying things out and seeing what fails. So trying to load particular things, trying particular keys, trying particular modes of operation, trying things in different rings, whatever it may be, and seeing what happens. And that could leak information about what's going on in the TE. And that's something to be very careful about. And one of the areas I'd love for there to be more research on. It's just something I've thought about, but not really spent enough time on. Now, assuming that it does manage to get the runtime up, it can pass errors to that. It may be that the errors are, have not stopped the runtime happening, but there may be errors that it was able to overcome, and so it can talk to that. The other thing, of course, it can do is it may choose to pass information down to the host, to external components, and it may actually be able to sign, encrypt, or hash those if it has access to keying materials, which means that that information is stuff which cannot so easily be tampered by the untrusted components in this picture. And that may be very useful. So, for instance, if there are forced error attacks, it may be that this component can pass information which can be picked up by a friendly party later on and store it on the host in some way. Okay. Right, so let's move.
Question. Depending on how you define your TE instance loader component, one of the things you mentioned in the runtime was that you can use the control plane to communicate with the client, and you can then use that for logging and debugging. You didn't make any statements about the client in the TEE loading portion. Okay. Now, of course, the runtime would typically communicate with the outside by going via something like the TE execution component, or maybe during loading the TE internal, the TE loading component as a thing that hosts the way of doing communication to, say, a network card or whatever. And so my question to you is really, couldn't everything that the runtime does as far as logging and debugging also be done by the TE loader, as far as if I wanted to debug or log events from there, the same thing would apply?
Define the loader. So I'm kind of assuming that the loader piece does not have access to networking, and that is part of what happens in the runtime. Again, I talk about this a bit in the blog post, but it's a matter of definition. I'm saying that basically you can't do much until you have the runtime up. But of course, if you can set that up in the loading and you think it's worthwhile doing, you can do. Now, of course, it increases your TCB if you're putting some extra capabilities in that which are not relevant specifically to that task. But if the model of operation you have requires that, then that's entirely a good decision to make. But it should be explicit. And that's one of the things that I want to be harping on about here, is that when you do these things, you should be explicit about what you're doing, why and where they sit.
I mean, this comes up like in your timeline slide, if I remember right, the TE loading component starts earlier than the runtime starts. Okay.
It does.
And so how do you do
part of its job is to start the runtime?
Yeah. How do you do the debugging of the TE loading component when the runtime isn't up? Right. It's a debugging challenge.
And that's very, very difficult. And so one of the options is to pass stuff down to the host and hope you can do it in a protectable enough way that you could do something with it. And it is one of the problems for anyone who's actually written these pieces, as we have in NARCs, to decide how to do this. I remember Nathaniel saying the first time he implemented the assembly language instructions for SGX, he basically had to put, he was guessing for quite a time until he managed to get the basic loading pieces up, because there's almost no way to do it other than generating page faults and hoping you can guess what the error messages mean.
Or using a hardware debugger like a JTAG for cases where that is actually supported.
Yeah, and then you need to decide whether that's a safe thing to do as well. So there's all sorts of really interesting questions. Indeed. Right, let's carry on. These are exactly the right sort of discussions I wanted to be having, so I'm very, very pleased. So the thing that the TE loading component talks to, the internal one, is the external part of that. And this should hopefully be talking very nicely to it, but we have to be aware that it is subject to malicious manipulation. Now, assuming that the TE loading component can talk to it rather than to the client over a control plane, the TE loading, may be able to choose to store or transmit error or debug messages to the host, to the TE loading, maybe to the execution pieces, and maybe to the client, again, depending on what access it has. And again, the plea here is when we design these things, let's be explicit about what mechanisms, what channels are available, how they're protected, and how they should be used and when. So let's carry on.
Hi, I have a question.
Yeah, please.
The T from my experience, the TE loader part should not have any access to sensitive data. So I don't know what kind of sensitive error report or information that TE loader can leak. So could you give some example?
Yeah, so it may be. I talked about attacks. If we go back one, please, Dave. So it may be that, if there are force error attacks that the TE loading internal component has access to, it may choose to integrity protect and sign maybe a message which can be logged out to the TE loading external piece and hope that that piece will do the right thing with it. Now, even if it doesn't do the right thing, if anyone does get it, at least you have a guarantee, a cryptographic guarantee that it hasn't been tampered with. You can't be sure that it's going to get there, but at least you have a chance of leaving some breadcrumbs that maybe can be followed. Or it may even encrypt. Does that answer the question?
I don't think so. My main experience is with Intel SGS. The TE loader is just part of the Intel SGS DK, and it only has access to the enclave, which is plain text. So
okay, so that assumes a particular implementation. So in the NARC's implementation, for instance, that is not the case. So we've written our own piece to do some of this, which sits outside but is not part of the Intel SGX SDK. There are multiple implementations, and that's part of why this is a fun set of questions to think about and conversations to have.
Yeah,
but your point is entirely correct that in some cases you don't want to do this, which is why we need to state it and say when it's right and when it's wrong. And it may be that it's always wrong and I've got it wrong myself. And I'm very, very happy to hear that, because it means other people are thinking about it. And that's more heads are good, better than just one.
Yeah, if the TE loader part is have more complex responsibility, like dynamic loading, and need to guarantee the whatever the application that is loading are kept confidential and with integrity protected, then I would think it's more natural to put that responsibility in the runtime part, because the runtime part has more like a network access. Maybe.
But if you say that the TE loader, that you have no runtime until the TE loader has completed, for instance, then you don't have that option. Or that the TE loader doesn't have network access. So yes, that is absolutely one implementation option. And it may be a better implementation option, but I think we need to leave the possibility of multiple different approaches.
Yeah, okay. The overall problem, I think, is a very good question. It's just if we focus on the TE loader part, I think that part should be as simple as possible and should not have any access to application data. So
I 100% agree.
Stage,
and you're quite right. And that is why I showed in the, could you go back to the timeline thing, please, Dave? So one of the options here, in fact, in all of these options, the TE loading does not overlap with the application lifetime.
Yeah,
that was intentional. Okay. let's carry on. I'm so pleased that people have engaged with these questions, because I was worried that it was rubbish and uninteresting. So cool. So let's now talk about the T execution. So this is the thing that sits underneath the runtime. Again, your model may vary, but basically allows the runtime and the application above it to communicate in some way with stuff which is outside the T instance. So we assume that it can communicate via the application and the runtime, but also in the other direction via a T runtime external component. So in the NOx world, for instance, this is the thing which takes syscalls and passes them across the T boundary to the external piece, which is the T execution, T external, which takes those syscalls and then sends them to the kernel, and vice versa. So that's the way we think of it in our world. It is what is responsible for communicating across that boundary at runtime. And my very, very strong assertion is that the best way to do this is to restrict communication to standardized messages, to a small known of well-known messages which cannot, for instance, include free text. Now, that is impossible, but I think we should constrain as much as possible. So, there are times you need to be able to put data which you cannot be certain of through a thing. Because if, for instance, you're sending, you want to send network messages, then those network messages are going to include just text. But if you know that it's only network messages or storage messages which can have unconstrained free text, and they're constrained to certain lengths, and that the boundary checking is in place, etc., you're in a much better position than allowing free form communication across that boundary.
Mike,
this is a standard.
Don't you think? I mean, I totally get the dangers inherent in parsing free text and whatnot, but I think, and I also agree with you that schematization is good, because at least you should standardize on the things that where there are common types of things that we need to be able to communicate. Yeah. At the same time, I think we have perhaps in JSON a mechanism for communicating with like really time-tested, battle-tested parsers, where I think both concerns can be achieved at once.
And that may be one of the ways of dealing with this sort of problem. It's a known set of issues, and those are exactly the sort of mechanisms we want to be considering. One of the things I'm saying here is, for instance, do you want to create a full POSIX implementation? If so, you should be very clear about that and why you want to do it, and do bounds checking, for instance. Do you want to do just a subset of syscalls, which is what we've decided to do in NOx, for instance? We decided to do that because the smaller number of messages, the easier it is to check, the easier it is to parse, and the easier it is to define, so that people can do auditing on the design of that boundary, that cross-boundary communication, which frankly is one of the most important parts of a TE runtime, TE's life cycle, shall we say. Okay.
Question on this?
Please, Eric.
One of the things I think about as possible here, and I'm not sure anybody's going down this path, I'm starting to think about SE Linux protections and in the internal software architecture that you get for validating inter-process communication, as well as checking what's going on in the layer. Have you thought about the TE execution, the TE loading, and the runtime from the perspective of the layered communications and validation of
that is absolutely one way
TE.
of doing it. I agree. Now, of course, if you're going to use SE Linux, you either need to decide to trust that outside your trust boundary, which is problematic, or implement it fully internally, or do something similar, obviously.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, indeed. And we take a fairly similar approach in NLX. We haven't done it quite that way. But yes, those are absolutely the sorts of controls that you may wish to be implementing here.
All right, thank you.
So, and in fact, the way I think of what we've done is that, you know, we are implementing a WASM time as the WASM time WASI compliant runtime. And we know by testing and by looking at the code, what set of syscalls we need to support to allow that particular WASI compliant runtime to work. Now, if you choose to do a different runtime, like a cryo, for instance, you've decided to do that, then you're going to have a different set of syscalls. And I think of these as masking and saying, you know, if you, for instance, have an environment which could support either, you say, well, we have one mask for one and another mask for the other. Don't just default open because it's easier.
Yeah, exactly. I can imagine a TE execution having an externally managed firewall rule set that is untouchable by the application.
Yes, absolutely. Those are exactly the sorts of things that we're doing, and we have a similar approach in NLX. When we load up an application, it does have a set of capabilities actually based on WebAssembly and equivalents, which allow you to control that as you boot it up. Cool. Let's carry on. So this is the other half of the execution, and it's similar issues to the piece on its left. And the other thing, of course, we need to be aware that the host component can manipulate messages. So if the host component gets a syscall from the TE execution internals, then there's no way to guarantee that what it gets back is what you'd hope it would be. So you need to be very careful. That's one of the other reasons for being very careful about parsing. Right, let's carry on. Right, so just a few words about the differences between logging and debugging. Let's carry on. So why do I think it's important? Well, I think that because an environment which supports both of them must be clear about the state, you know, and by which I mean, are you in a pure logging mode state, or do you also allow debugging? Now, if the latter, who are you making it clear to? Where do you make that clear? And how? And how do you prove that's the case? You can't just say I'm in debug mode, because who can understand that? Who can make decisions based on it? Steve, you've got a hand up, please. What can I help?
know, one question I have here, and maybe you're going to answer it on a future slide, is when you're talking about debugging, are you talking about debugging the runtime or the application or the loader?
Yes.
Yes. Because they're different parties doing those things at different times.
They are, and that is hence the point. To what entity? Because if it's the runtime you're debugging, then that's a kind of control plane area sort of level. If it's the application, that's a completely different thing, right? That's more a client. And so, yes, these are exactly the questions that we need to do. I talk a bit about this, I think, in the blog post as well, since I wrote it, but this is exactly what we need to be discussing here. And as we've already discussed, you know, debugging some of the pieces that happen before the runtime comes up is very difficult. So yes, thank you. That's exactly the point that I failed to make very well on this slide. Thank you.
Well,
and the next thing,
it only matters if debug privileges are different. If the debug privileges aren't different, it doesn't matter. So it only matters if debug privileges are different. And it may or may not actually matter, right?
Agreed.
Right? As a relying party, you might say, oh, the whole thing's under debug.
Yes, but I think you probably want to have all layers above the component which is in debug should have a way of knowing that they are basically in debug mode. That makes sense.
And just to tie a couple things together, I know you said attestation was out of scope, but you can imagine an attestation service having a policy that says, I'll only talk to you or give you, secret data or whatever if debugging is off and audit logging is on.
Yes.
Right. In that sense, there's an obvious example of how they're different, right? Because you require the logging for auditing purposes, and you require the debugging be off for security purposes, and they're different things in that example.
And we make some of those choices in NARCs or are beginning to. So yes, absolutely that. Oh, a thumbs up from Dan. That makes me happy. And the other thing is a classic design thing. You know, we talked about JTAG, right? It shouldn't be possible to move to a less secure state. If you've gone into debug mode, you should never be able to move that instance away from debug, because you can never, ever be sure that you have truly moved out of debug, because once you're in a TE, you have privilege at that level or above, and you cannot be sure that that has been removed. So, and I said at the bottom, life would be much easier if we could ignore debugging, but it's frankly unrealistic. Right, so we're getting towards the end here. So profiles. Next, yeah. So here's again assertions using the standard must and should. And I wish I'd used colons consistently, but I haven't. So again, these are assertions and what I want to discuss and what I would love the TAC to take on as things to be discussed. So firstly, you know, always assume the host malicious, and I think that's something that we take as an assumption here. Secondly, that you should probably support different runtime profiles and not just logging. You need to think about debugging, and there may be different types of logging profiles, you know, runtime logging and application logging, and but not TE loader debugging, for instance, might be one profile. But logging must be at least part of them. And even if it's to say we're not logging, that is in itself an important thing to say. Another, you know, assertion is that you must minimize information flow between outside components, because if you don't do that, you're in for a world of pain. You cannot be sure what's going to leak. You've got side channel inferences and those sorts of things. And also you should consider, whenever you're doing threat modeling for any sort of trusted execution environment, instance or runtime or framework, you must consider leakage via logging and debugging as part of those threat models. And I would love to see that. You know, we don't have that fully done in NARCs. I'd love to see all of the everything which is part of the CCC doing that.
By leakage, do you mean side channels? So for instance, if I know that in case of errors, I'm going to emit a message soon and it's going to be of a certain size, that's information leakage right there.
I include that. There's all sorts of inference and any other type of leakage. So yes, and again, one of those areas I should have been more explicit. Maybe I'm in the blog, can't remember, but again, exactly the sort of discussion I want to be having so we can be explicit.
Yeah, as another example, right? You can think about any logs that are stored, right? You'd say, well, then sure, they better be stored encrypted, right? Or you're going to get information leakage through the log storage. But it's also the log processing, right? Is the processing of the log, not on the device, is the processing log, is that done in a TEE, right? Or could you have a data in use attack on whoever it is that's reading the log, right? So you got to think about the other aspects on the client and the storage and so on. So,
yeah, exactly. And just lastly, this is my assertions of should things. I think it's probably good practice to restrict messages to a defined set with no plain text fields, as I kind of discussed. I'm not sure that's actually realistic, but hey. But also, when we are talking about these profiles, that I think that it's important to allow hooks so that you can use something like OPA, for instance, to specify and manage what these profiles are, how they're applied, what they mean. Again, I don't have answers for how the best way of doing this, but I think it's something I'd like to encourage us as an industry body, or an industry, shall I say, to be considering.
Rob,
Mike. Yeah, go ahead,
Sorry?
Robbie.
Oh,
Robbie,
yeah,
you got
yeah.
your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah,
I didn't see, sorry.
No worries. Yeah, thanks, Mike. Yeah, I think the differentiation between debugging and logging is very clear. I think would be good to add sort of similar levels of, just like for debugging, you described the internal debugging versus sort of platform debugging, and then representing those modes. Even for logging, it'll be good to sort of describe how the log information is stored and for what levels, right? And also authorization of the logging user, right? Like who is the logging
Yes.
intended for, right? And also
how can you control that? Is it what are the mechanisms for that? Again, all of these things are exactly what I want us to be considering, and there is going to be no one answer because the use cases are different, the implementations are different. But if we again think about them and have it as part of our practice of confidential computing, it can only be good for the industry, I think. Dan, you have a question as well.
Yeah, by plain text, do you mean like free field entry variable kinds of things, or you mean plain text as in not encrypted?
Yes and yes. Again, one of those areas I should have been more explicit. I think both of them have concerns, and I apologize for not being more explicit.
So are you suggesting that logs should be encrypted?
I think there are certainly times when that makes sense. If you have access to key material, which allows you to encrypt them in a useful way. And again, that may depend on what part of the life cycle you are and which component is doing the logging and to where. This is why it's all really complex.
Mm-hmm. Thanks.
Simon?
I think that may be the last slide. Can we just see?
Yeah, I think so. So I'll let Simon has his hand up, so I'll get him to speak. But I think I would like to hear if people have suggestions on things at the TAC or next steps, things that we should do coming out of this. But certainly this has been great. Go ahead, Simon.
So I think the last two in the must categories are actually shoulds. I don't think it's a choice, right? About where I'm presuming that by confidential computing environment, you're really meaning the actual application as opposed to the underlying hardware mechanism that actually allows you to provide for some form of defense of the application.
Yes, I am generally talking about all the components I talked about, not the CPU, for instance.
Right. So I would have put the last two in must to shoulds.
I can see why.
I might put them as a conditional must because I think, Mike, you're saying they are must for the software components, and Simon is saying they're not must for the hardware components.
He might even be going further than saying it's even not a must for the software. I'm not sure if I was writing an RFC whether I could give these a must. I might have to downgrade them to a should, or maybe shall. I know must and shall are supposed to mean the same thing, but they don't really. So so these are the conversations I think we should be having, because I didn't think about the difference enough, Simon, which is why I'm glad you phrased it.
I don't understand the difference between must consider and should consider.
Yeah, I think just using the terms minimize and consider gives you that gradient that it makes the should.
I think to Simon's point,
I think you're probably right.
Include linkage, meaning I would strengthen the word consider, even if you have
I hate to give my fellow Englishman, sort of like English lessons, which I know he's much better at it than me anyway.
Well, I know, no, but this is a set of slides I put together for people, and I don't pretend they're perfect. And again, this is why I wanted to have this discussion in this forum, because I've not had, other than internally within Profi and the Announce group, I've not had it, and I really want to have these because I think you're right. I don't stand by these slides being perfect, and right. Let's.
All right. As an American, I just have to say it's fun to listen to two Brits argue about the English language. So,
well, at least I spelled minorize correctly.
All right.
Quite right.
And organizational.
It's wrong.
Parche Webster. Yeah. Okay. Fine. So, any other questions? I thank you so much for engaging. I had a horrible feeling everyone's going to say this looks rubbish and boring, but
before we move on, I'm just going to repeat my question. Is there anybody that has things that they think would be great action items to sign out of this discussion before we move on to another topic?
Yes, I thought that was a good prompt. There's security best practices for logging. And I'm not sure if coming out of this, it's clear that there are separate best practices for confidential compute. But if there are, that seems like that would be a very helpful thing for us to publish.
Well, it would have to necessarily be stricter for confidential compute, right? Because look, ultimately, when we deal with logs, then we expect that logs actually don't leak. We don't, when an enterprise operates the data center, they don't place logs in a public domain, right? With confidential computing, if I'm operating in, say, a public cloud, then if I expose my logs that way, then I am putting them effectively outside of my domain of trust. So yeah, you can't draw a strict parallel between the two.
So Mike kind of begged a question without making any opinion on the matter as to should the TAC desire to have a white paper or some other format. Are there people in the TAC that would like to form a group to think about this, to come back with what we should do? Any other suggestions? I'm trying to figure out how we make progress, if any, on deciding whether we actually want to have a document or some other form on this.
I have a request actually, which is that, as I said, this is based on a blog post, and what I'd love to do is get people to consider the blog post, which I think is probably a more in-depth, but not necessarily any more correct discussion of these points, and see whether that I think before we see where we might go, that's probably the next stepping stone before making a decision, if that makes sense.
So if I can ask you to paste you may have sent it before,
but it's in the slides. So if we put the slide, if we publish the slides, I think it's the second slide or something. If we publish the slides, then people can get to it from there.
All right, I'm just wondering if we can paste it into the.
There you go. Oh yeah, just put it
here.
in the thing. Yeah, sure.
Okay, so I'm just going to do this and then copy it into the chat in case people want to put it into notes and stuff. Okay, great. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
Thanks for your time. Enjoyed that. It's great.
Simon, your hand is still up, by the way.
Oh, sorry. So if we were to write a white paper, would it be specifically just on logging, debugging, or did you want something a bit more broader than that?
Who is that a question to? I think you means everybody in the room here. So,
my view is that there's enough to talk about in just this that it's probably worth doing on its own, but there's a lot more to talk about as well.
I think logging and debugging would make sense together, because in some people's mind, it's kind of a spectrum with things in the middle that might be hard to define which it is. I mean, is debugging via printfs, is that logging or debugging? And it's kind of square in the middle,
That question came up when I delivered this first time around as well, yeah.
And so trying to not divide those topics into, say, two different documents, assuming there was a document, I think covering them both in the same document is a good thing, because there's actually a spectrum of things that if you're interested in one end, you're also interested in the middle of the spectrum. So
I think it'd be interesting to get to a set of best practices for people developing applications for confidential compute. And if that's just like a laundry list that's on one page, that might even be more consumable than if we put out a long white paper that a much smaller.
Yeah, no, I think if we're going to do that, it'd be nice to back it with something, not necessarily white paper, maybe an improved version of the blog post, if we could do that. I don't mind, but I think that's actually very helpful. A laundry list of best practices or suggested approaches with some, why this is important. I think there's a lot to be said for that, Don. I rather like that.
Yeah, individual hat on. I like the idea of best practices too myself. So. All right.
So please have a look at the article, and let's have a discussion about where it falls down, which is probably most of the way through.
Okay.
Thank you.
Let's continue this discussion on the list, and if we need to revisit it in the next meeting, we can put an agenda item on there if there are things to talk about there. But please post comments to the list to start the discussion there. So, all right. So I'm going to go on now, if that's okay. Let's do a quick action item review here. I think Zong Min is on the call, or at least he was. I don't think he is now. Okay, so let's keep going. Mentors on the agenda later today in a little bit. We'll get to the common test infrastructure, so we'll cover this one there. So anything you have to report on your items, Kurt?
Sure. Number 3 there, the find out if VCO is needed for the governance on GitHub. that was mainly targeted from the discussion around the white paper. But I have submitted to legal on that, and that's pending review. Let's see, the next three are all complete, and they've been that way for a couple of meetings. But if there are any questions there, I can certainly address those.
I guess we'll come to the terminology in half an hour or so, but has the LF creative team started on the conversion yet?
They have looked at it and have confirmed that Markdown is fine and they're able to do that. Yeah,
They're not waiting for us to tell them that the timeline is up to them then, correct?
Let's defer that to the discussion
Okay. All right, we'll
later. We have a whole slide on it.
Okay, fair enough. All right, fine. All right, then let's keep going.
So, Dave, were you able to check in with Stephen on his?
No.
Okay.
Stephen was out like yesterday. The board met and Stephen wasn't at the board meeting. I think he's either out of town on vacation or something. So he's actually out right now.
And then a quick comment, Dave. I'm just like, sorry, but I noticed that we have this governance link under confidential computing, and there is governance of the TAC itself, and then there is governance of confidential computing. And I thought I would like us to have both.
Yep. Terminology collision, I agree. Sorry, I was jumping to here because it seems like I saw another action item in here that I didn't see on that slide. So I was just looking for the words action item on here somewhere. Okay, so that's that one you just reported on.
Yeah, I hope I haven't missed any. I went through there.
That's that. Okay, yeah, okay. You're right. They're all there. Okay. Bye. All right. I don't know what to do about the governance collision, Mark, because this one's been there for a long time. I don't know if there's any other synonym to use. So suggestions accepted. So suggestions welcome. All right, so let me go on and talk about common test infrastructure, unless there's any other comments in the action items. Okay.
Yeah, just I don't know if so Zongmin is listed there as the mentor for Oakland, and I don't believe that is necessarily changing, but
yeah, I was going to bring that up when we get to this slide here. So I'll get to that on slide 10.
Very well.
Which is mentors and stuff. So
thanks.
So in the meantime, so common test infrastructure. So we had a little bit of discussion. So remember last tech meeting, I introduced this topic. We had a little bit of discussion about common test infrastructure, the costs and things. And then I brought it up at the board level to see if the board had any guidance for the TAC on this matter. Okay. And so at this point, I think I'm ready to make a potential proposal, but the action item was to make sure that any projects that had opinions were or had weighed in. I think Nick weighed in on behalf of NARCs and I weighed in on behalf of Open Enclave. But anybody else was invited to reach out to their projects and collect information as to how or whether they would use common test infrastructure, what they would use there, and report back. So that was that action item that was back there for mentors. But we at least have feedback from one of the, probably the first two projects approved into the CCC. And for those of you who weren't here last time, since I don't think we had quorum last time, we do now. As a reminder, we'd approved $15K for common test infrastructure, meaning test infrastructure that is not per project, right? This is the amount per project, about $7,500 per project, but you can get hardware or whatever is necessary to do testing for TE or CCC related stuff. But common stuff was things that needed to be shared across projects. Example that I gave when we first approved that is to say, let's say you had a GitHub integrated self-hosted runner that was SGX capable that multiple projects could use in their GitHub CI/CDs, right? That would be an example, right? Whether it's hardware costs, whether it's service costs for integration with GitHub or whatever, okay? And so this number at the time that we voted on this 15K was picked out of the air as just being double the 7,500. It was just a guess. And so what I reported last time is that after discussion with projects and LF folks, it was determined that the main cost around common test infrastructure is not the service cost like for example, GitHub cycles or whatever. It's not the hardware, okay, for which 15K is probably fine. The main cost is who's maintaining it. Since it's not project specific, it needs some person that is tasked with being the maintainer of this, which is not a full-time job, right? And so we said, what would it take for an LF person to be the maintainer of it? Okay, because there's other consortiums that have done this and have an LF person that say manages, Jenkins infrastructure or whatever it is that the consortium or foundation uses. I've been in 2 other foundations that have done that, and it's been an LF person, an LF PM or LF IT person that's been the manager of that. Brian Warner got back to me saying the price range for a person is in the 50 to 200K range. They'd have to hire somebody and so on. And I kind of scratched my head and said, well, why would you have to hire somebody? Because we don't need a full-time person. Ideally, you should have somebody that's shared across multiple foundations or consortiums, right? And so we need some fraction of said person's time that is willing to do this, just like we do for, I don't know, LF creative services or something like that, right? We don't have to have dedicated LF creative people for CCC, right? You have some portion that's rented out from that team's time, right? And so, so I brought this up at the board level and said, well, we've got this 100K for which which is not allocated, other than a meeting or 2 ago, we approved a portion of this for website, and that came out of the Grameen ask. So this is actually not 100 now; it's a little bit less than 100. But even the low end of Brian's price range, the 50K, right, is still within our budget. And so the board said, well, we gave you budget. We wanted you to use it. If you need to use 50K to augment this, then, more power to you. You've already been granted the budget. Find some productive way to use this 100K, right? And so I don't know if, Kurt, you had a chance to follow up any more from yesterday's meeting that you want to say before I actually make a proposal. That the proposal would be to say, this 15K is for, hardware and OpEx stuff, and up to 50K for personnel to manage this, in which case we've got a total of the proposal that I would be making would be 65K for common test infrastructure. Again, 15K was pulled out of the air before. Now that we have some data, I'm going to propose it 65K unless we have new information. So Kurt, anything you want to add?
Just for clarification, I think the range on 50 to 200, it's a huge range, and I think he was saying based on whether this would be someone part-time, which would probably be the lower end of that scale, and someone full-time operating, maintaining this. So I think that's what the range is. I agree. I think this would definitely be at the lower end of that range, and so I think this is this would be a good place to start.
Okay. Thank you, Kurt. So then, given that we have somewhere north of $75,000 for the rest of the year that is completely unallocated, it's already May. How are we going to use that 75K that the board tells us find ways to spend money that projects would use? I'd like to propose that the TAC authorize 50 out of this 100K to fund common test infrastructure maintenance by personnel from the Linux Foundation. So I'd like to motion that is a proposal that we can vote on. Would anybody like to second or amend the question before I call for a vote?
Yeah, could I amend the question
Sure.
or suggest an amendment, which is that you mentioned that that the OESDK and NARCS had given their information. I'd like to know A, what that is, and B, if anyone else has provided their input at this stage.
So to answer your question as to what it was, so in the common test infrastructure from last time, Nick's comment was, NARCS has benefited from hiring a person, looking at hiring an intern, supports an LF person managing GitHub CI/CD, right? That was the minuted note from Nick.
I didn't just mean NARCS, I mean OESDK and also
so OESDK, I had reported previously that OESDK said they would not use common test infrastructure because they don't have anybody funded to maintain it. Whereas if they were the ones that said, hey, if CCC had a person that did it, that would then unlock our ability to use it.
Lovely. Yeah. And have any other projects got back?
So let me go back to the list of mentors, which is here, and see Eric or Thomas or Dan or Howard, do you have any data from the projects that you are mentors from?
The attestation SIG does not yet have code, so.
That
I
was
think Thomas, yeah, Thomas is on call, so he can, yeah, speak for Verizon.
Okay.
Verizon, I don't know.
Okay. Between Verizon and Veracruz, technically your name is somehow associated with both of those. So any feedback?
Not really.
Do you think that if there were common test infrastructure, because I think both of these are ARM capable things, so there could be common test infrastructure that was using, say, an ARM-based, a Truststone or whatever ARM-based TEE that could be used across multiple projects, because we have at least 3, if not 4 projects that can use ARM-based stuff right now. Is that something you think would be technically feasible for Veracruz or Verizon to be reusing actual TE hardware in, say, CI/CD or whatever? So,
well, for Verizon, not for now. Veracruz, I need to check with them, but I suspect no.
Okay.
But I will double check with the Veracruz guys.
So we've heard from multiple projects that use Intel-based hardware that it would be feasible there and it would be useful. I don't know for sure about the ARM-based ones, or say AMD-based ones or RISC-V-based ones, if that would be usable or not. But
so I'm in favor. I just worry that I wouldn't want other projects to feel that there's only a couple of projects which said they'd use it, and that no one else gets a chance to play. But
yeah,
I think if you start using it, then maybe others would come. I wouldn't look at that as an obstacle to you adopting it.
Okay, so Mike, I did not hear any amendments to the question.
No, I agree. I take back my amendments.
Okay. Thank you. All right, so then I would like to then I think I would like to call for a vote unless anybody has a problem with the process.
Whenever we do a vote, I like to see what's written to vote upon it.
Okay, let me proposed the TAC budget 50K out of the line item, which is the consortium IT services 100K line item to allocate to LF maintenance. I don't know if that's the right word, of common test infrastructure.
Management and maintenance?
Management, thank you. That's the word I was trying to think of. Okay.
Starts with a M.
All right, so this is the proposal right here. Okay, is that clear enough?
Thank you.
Okay, and for Kurt's purposes, I'm just going to copy that into chat so you can cut and paste it out of chat, Kurt. All right, it is now vote time, so I'm going to do a roll call on this one, if that's okay. Giuseppe?
Yes, for me.
Okay, Tate?
Yes, I'm good. Yeah, well, yes.
Thomas?
Yep.
I've not seen, is Eric Northup or Shanker on? I've not seen them. Okay. I've not seen Yulia. Howard?
Yes.
Dan?
Yes.
I vote yes. Lily?
Lily, come off mute, but maybe you're having audio. You feel free to use the chat if it's not
use
working.
chat. Okay. Unless Lily has a comment that changes the vote. Okay. Okay. Thank you, Lily. All right. Vote passes. Thank you. We will update the budget slide accordingly. I don't think we need to report back to the governing board until the next regular board meeting, where we have the updated version of the slide here, since they already said that was okay. So, and it's already within our budget. So, all right. So let's go on. Thank you all. This is our updated here. The main addition from last time is the fact that CCC attestation now has the topic for the June webinar. Let's see, is Ben on? Okay, so what we talked about last meeting when Ben was here, last TAC meeting when Ben was here, is to have a panel discussion where a number of you were present at the discussion where we had volunteers for the panel. I think Ben is the person that will be organizing it. He has not, I asked in the board meeting whether he'd settled on who he wanted to be on the panel because we provided a number of suggestions. FYI, Mike, your name was on the list of suggestions. Other people whose names are on the list of suggestions were Mark Novak, Simon Johnson, and myself, who are all in the discussion. And I don't think he's on here right now, but Nellie in the board meeting suggested that maybe Keith Moyer, we would want a moderator. Sorry, I'm jumping over into the outreach one, but since I don't see Ben here, I'm kind of summarizing what Ben and I were talking about. I don't know if Ravi, if you want to add, Ravi dropped. Okay. Our main outreach people have already dropped, so I'll summarize this. I know we have a slide later, but I'll cover this now anyway. The discussion was we want there's somebody to be a moderator, right? The moderator could be you, Mike, or it could be, say, Keith Moyer on behalf of as a chair of the CCC attestation, and then it really is a CTAC attestation hosted webinar. And any panelists, we don't want there to be too many of them, but ideally they should represent different perspectives, right? So for example, if myself or say Hank were a panelist, then we might represent a standards perspective. If Simon was on it, it might represent a chip vendor and implementer perspective, right? If Keith was on there, it might be a chair perspective. If Mark Novak is on there, it'd be an end user advisory council perspective, and so on. And so to have different perspectives. So Mike, your hand is up. Please go ahead.
Yeah, so firstly, I think this is a very good idea. Secondly, I have, for a variety of reasons, been unable to spend any time recently on the CCC attestation SIG, and I was wondering whether I need to offer my resignation as one of the co-chairs just because I've been unable to do anything, for which I apologize. I've been ill and I've been very busy as well and traveling, and I'm concerned that I'm not doing what needs to be done, and I was going to offer, if that would make sense, my resignation, because I don't feel I've been fulfilling my role correctly.
We got two other co-chairs on the call here at least, so.
Maybe this is something that we want to discuss off, and that's fine, but I just say, I'm very in favor of this and I'm very happy to participate, but I don't want people to feel that I'm doing so.
Yeah, I think when Larry stepped down recently, the co-chairs huddled about that and then made a recommendation to the TAC. So that sounds appropriate here, is to say,
okay,
let the chairs huddle, and then you guys can make a recommendation for us to discuss. So. All right. Other things
Dave,
on this slide. Yeah, was there a comment?
Oh, I was just going to comment. One of the main things to point out here is the Verizon.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, if you want to comment on that.
Board approved. You notice this date is yesterday. I put this into the email that I sent to the TAC, but we did have the actual vote for Verizon yesterday. So congratulations to the Verizon project is becoming the latest official CCC project. So
thank you.
Well earned.
The action items for Verizon, there's for the CCC and Verizon as a whole, there's at least 3 action items, right? One is that the website gets updated to list Verizon as an official project, right? And so that's something that's not, that I think Outreach has already took the action item yesterday to take care of. The next one is that if it's not already there, the Verizon project needs to put the approved technical charter in their repository. So I don't know if Thomas or Howard, you know if that's been done already.
In the Verizon repo, you mean?
The Verizon repository in GitHub or whatever, the approved technical charter, you know, whether you put it in PDF format, markdown format, it doesn't matter as long as it's there, ideally in the root directory of the GitHub repository.
Okay, I have an action on this.
Now that you are official, now you actually have a granted, legally enforced technical charter.
Yep.
So, and then the last one is now that it's official one, we have to formally assign a mentor, where before we had a proposed mentor to help them through the process. And so Howard, are you willing to continue as mentor to Verizon, or do you need to hand that off to somebody else?
I'm happy to continue.
Okay.
Thank you, Howard.
Then
no problem.
Unless there's any objections, we like volunteers. I think we designate Howard as the continued mentor for this one.
Thank you.
All right, those are our 3 action items for those are the 3 action items for new things. So, all right. The last thing that's on here, I said I was going to come back to it here, is Tate, you mentioned that Zongmin was no longer at Intel, but he was still in potentially in the confidential computing field. He is currently the mentor to Occlum. And I think we need to find out if Zongmin is willing to continue in that, since you do not have to be a TAC member to be a mentor.
Oh, okay. I will reach to him and see
Okay.
if he wants to be mentor.
Okay. Yeah.
And,
So if you can.
yeah. And by the way, Occlum is also interested in using the common test infrastructure.
Awesome. Thank you for, let's make sure we capture that, Kurt. I would love to have at least 3 projects that are moving towards implementing it by the, using the common test infrastructure in some way by the end of the year, whether they're using it by the end of the year or not, whether at least they're taking steps to or getting the common test infrastructure set up. I know some of these things take time to onboard. So both from an LF creation sense, as well as a project being able to consume. So that's okay. So
Hey, are there other projects that want to use test infrastructure?
Say that again.
Are there other projects that want to use SGS machines as a common test infrastructure?
I think it's a candidate for a bunch of projects. I think each project needs to say itself whether it would, but I think there's probably at least 4 of these projects, maybe more, that actually run on SGX right now.
Okay.
I think NARCS, OESTK, Grameen, Occlum, I think do. I think Verizon aspires to. I don't know that Verizon does yet, right?
Okay, thank you.
Okay. That's all the updates that I know of on this slide. I don't know that we have anybody else from outreach, and I've already talked about, this was the May webinar topics that we talked about a minute ago. This is the one that we still need an action item on that last time I asked for, that's why I didn't have the word action, but in the last time minutes, I mentioned that we need somebody to pick this one up. And so as a reminder, the wiki page and Wikipedia trusted computing right there. This is the problematic phrase right here, right? We all say false, but this page needs to be updated. And we also use, there could actually be another page that right now there is no entry for confidential computing, right? But at least correcting this one would be a first start. And we needed somebody to take the action on this. Originally, Outreach said that they were going to do it. And then they decided there's too many technical nitpicks that people could make here. And they would much prefer somebody on the TAC that with a more technical background propose the actual change. And so looking for somebody, whether they're on the call or whether you want to nominate a colleague or an intern or a coworker or something, then feel free. But we need somebody to take the action item to fix this, right? Because this is a branding problem for us.
We can find someone with NARCS to do that. If
Thank you, Mike.
Nick, work on that together. Oh, you meant to be on the call, but yeah, we can do that.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Okay. Moving on. Yeah, establishing common terminology. So Eric and Steve, there's a couple of GitHub pull requests open right now. I'm wondering if we should just jump to those pull requests.
We can bring them up. They're trivial, and I think that they're good additions. I don't have the ability to approve, but others do. So I saw them. I certainly agree with them.
Because rather than us going to, because the Google Doc has now all moved to the Markdown, right? And so we don't need to go to the Google Doc anymore.
Right, and just a comment there. That's one of the reasons why I had told the creative team to hang on. It would be good to have a conclusion summary at the end of this document.
Okay, so this one just took Steve's paragraph out of the Google Doc and pasted into here. And I think Thomas had a one-word change here, which I think we did discuss in the call last time.
Yes.
Okay, so then I'm going to commit this, and we're going to move to the other one. Move to this view here, and I want to go ahead and merge this. So this is Steve's paragraph with that one change. So any objections to merging this?
Nope.
I think we had everybody. I'm partly asking this because we have more people on the call now than we had 2 weeks ago. So this paragraph might be new to a couple people here. So I'm just leaving it up on the screen just long enough for any of the people that weren't here on the last call to read through here. So that's my stall. Okay. All right.
So I believe that NVIDIA has something around GPUs. I don't know whether we know yet whether that counts as confidential computing, but I'm aware that CPUs may be a bit limiting here.
How about if we change CPUs to processors?
Yeah, I like that.
You okay with that, Steve?
Fine with that.
Okay.
I think of GPUs as processors. They're just specialized, but
I agree.
CPUs,
They're just
but-
not the central processor.
Right.
So
Processors
Plus
is just a more
all
general term.
peripherals, all peripheral devices eventually, like network cards, storage cards.
They
all
all
of
have
them.
processors.
Right.
Okay, so I'm changing it to processors. Oh,
Looks good.
all right, so I'm going to go ahead and commit that one. And then if there's no other wording changes, then we'll go ahead and merge this one.
Is there a typo in there? Is a parameter enabled by fundamental architecture additions?
Oh, okay, yep, you're right.
Additions.
Okay, noted. Yeah, no, it's I have Grammarly turned on this machine, and it's Grammarly noticed the same thing. So, okay. All right. Now I think we can merge this one and move on to the other one. We have quorum on the call, so GitHub process allows us to merge this one immediately since we already have quorum on the call. Okay. So moving to the other one, which was this one. So this one is a technical topic here. Thomas, for anybody else, why don't you summarize your main comment here, because there's actually a question right here. So go ahead, Thomas, and just say what you said.
Okay, so it's quite also, I don't remember what I said. So the difference because it does not okay.
I think you're arguing that this is an obsolete reference.
Yeah, it's not very good. Yeah. Well, but I don't have a very good suggestion right now. One variable.
I also hate the use of the word secure.
It's also an example.
Yeah, it just says one viable, right? So it's only incorrect if, Thomas, you're arguing that it's no longer viable, right? As far as
He's not viable in all cases. That's what I was trying to argue here. In very specialized situation, you can compose this with TLS, but other, if you have TLS 1.2, then that doesn't work very well. So it's not very viable.
For confidential computing, would you ever use a TLS version earlier than 1.3 and call it secure for confidential computing?
No.
I'm with you, Steve. That was a leading question. Thank you for playing the straight man.
Yeah, why not? Perfectly profiled down to one cipher suite, and with everything disabled, why not? We are doing 75/25 bits now, and we are profiling 1.2 for secure use. While encouraging everyone to step up and do 1.3, but 1.2 is still out and is going to be out for a while. So I don't know.
I was looking for the accept button on this one, but
Can we make the suggestion less precise?
yeah,
You
let's
know.
go ahead and do an edit here. So
I mean, I always have problems with the word secure ever when it's ever used unqualified.
okay, so here's the text. How should we edit this? Like, do you still should say, we still want to say one viable technology, or do you want to change those words?
Yeah, that would be good, but say, let's say include TLS 1.3, right? Because there, whatever you choose, you cannot go wrong now. So
we
and
just
then-
have TLS 1.3 on the example, and then you have the rest. Would that be fine?
So do you mean this?
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
exactly what I meant. Yes.
Okay.
Although instead of the finite field, I would say elliptic curves, which is the thing that these days is more popular and for good reasons.
It's another good example. So we could remove the RFC completely and just say with elliptic curves.
Yeah, with elliptic curve Diffie-Hellman, something like this. Well, emerging is a bit, it's emerged.
Okay, gotcha. Sorry, I gotta spell it right. But there's no reference for that one because it's just a BIS document right now.
Yeah, it's talk with 1.3, right?
But I'm saying, is there a reference thing here? Is there a reference we can add here or not?
8446.
RFC for what?
8446.
Okay. So can you paste into chat the full name of that RFC? Just like here we have this is actually the name of the RFC.
We probably don't need two examples either. That's overweighting.
Oh, okay. So are you saying, Eric, you'd prefer just not having that and just ending the sentence here?
No, I'd just say take the example that's being offered and get rid of the others. I'm just trying to make sure we don't overweight.
Oh, are you saying delete 79.8.19?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to cancel this one and go back and start over from the this. Just because, as far as I know, this is the last technical change that we know of, right? So I'd rather have this be done right now to say, hey, unless there's anything that comes up, do all the PDF conversion. So.
Yep, I'd like to get it done too. So I think it's good if we just nail it down now, pick one example and not write too much against it, because that'll just overweight the document.
All right, so 8446 is, oh, you're saying just reference TLS 1.3. Okay, I see.
That's fine.
So something like that, and I'll change the footnote 4 to be the new reference.
Fantastic, thank you.
Does that read okay?
One other thing, it says mutually assured. Should that be mutually authenticated?
Let me check. I thought that was the right one.
It's also, can people hear me?
Yes.
I wasn't joking about the word secure.
Where?
Well, mutually assured secure channel. I mean, it's a real. Is it a technical? Is that a reference to a known standard, or?
It's all caps. So Eric.
Yes. Now the term came from elsewhere. Now I can't find it right now, but it was from another source. I'm trying to find it.
I need to grab the full reference for 8446.
And in response to the other question, I think that assurance can mean more than just attested. There may be other decisions that go into the decision to feel that you have assurance other than just attestation.
Yeah, I wasn't suggesting attestation, I was suggesting authentication. I thought the term was that you have a mutually authenticated channel, as in both sides are exchanging like a public key.
I'm with you then on this.
All right, so what was our conclusion here on this term?
We can make it
I like
mutually authenticated channel if people want it that way.
Yeah, I'm very happy with that.
That's fine.
So the only issue that I have with mutually authenticated channels, it says nothing about encryption and implies signing only.
Yeah, it's true.
Mutually authenticated encrypted channel
works for me.
In caps, because this isn't a formal term, right?
No.
Let's see, the aforementioned term. Okay, so that one is all caps there, but no, okay. So I'm thinking up here caps, but maybe down here having it be lowercase, which is at least one of the glossary conventions often followed in RFCs, but I don't know whether this should be capitalized or not.
You got to change your
I like that.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I got to do this. You're right, Eric. I got to do the same change down here.
Yeah, that looks good.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's good.
Okay.
I'm much happier with that. I think it's really very clear about what we're talking about.
All right. Then
see you, Lily.
One last look here. And here's the update to make footnote 4 be the new RFC, which is still referenced right here. All look good to people?
Yep.
All right. Apparently, I don't know why the add suggestion to batch isn't here, so I got to commit these separately here. Okay. All right. And so this one, I'm now going to resolve this one since we just did that. And I think that's all the outstanding comments on this one. All right. I think we can go ahead and merge this one now. I heard a bunch of nods.
Yep.
Heard a bunch of yeses or saw some nods. Yeah. All right. Done. That takes us, those are all the issues that I know of on the white paper. Is there anything else you know of, Eric or Steve?
No.
Nope.
Okay. Then let's go on and wrap up. So that means, Kurt, please have them proceed with the contents of the markdown.
I will do.
Thank you.
This is a complete white paper formatting. We'll get this rolling.
Yep. If there's anybody else that sees something, you can still get a pull request in before it pops out or whatever. But otherwise, we will
could you just put that link in the chat, please, so I can.
Yeah, it's like we have asked for reviews. Like last meeting, we asked.
I've been ill and away, so I haven't. So I apologize.
Ming and Hannes, we asked them to review it as well. We have not heard any feedback from them, so it is still possible. We'll still get some feedback trickling in, and that's okay. But I think Kurt, you said the timeline was what 1 to 3 weeks or something like that.
Right, and they may beat that now, but yeah, plan 1 to 3.
Okay. So let's say deadline is the next TAC meeting 2 weeks from now, but assume that if you don't have the feedback in by the next TAC meeting, that the white paper will be published before.
Well, assuming
it may be done before then.
Yeah, I was going to say if we do get a draft before then, I'll email the TAC.
Yeah. And
we can, then we can have review next meeting.
Okay. See, it's also worth mentioning that there is a CCC board meeting a month from now. I think it's what, June, is it like 24th or something? And there I'd reserved 15 minutes or so of time on that meeting for Eric to present the common terminology white paper to the CCC board there. We did something similar when we first did like the definition of what confidential computing and stuff was, right? So we want to educate the board on what we've been doing, and this is a great chance. So I think I gave Eric 15 minutes, and Eric, you said you were fine with that, so.
Yep.
All right. let's wrap up then. So any other business, right? We've now drained our queue of scheduled tech talks. And so we're looking for suggestions for future tech talks. Here is our last, so this one is the one that we just did, so we can remove that one, right? We only have one suggestion from before, which was Rust hypervisor firmware. We don't know how solid that one is as a topic. And so we're still looking for more topics. So we don't have anything lined up for next time yet.
Yeah, I've sent you an email about a possible tech talk. It is the enclave device blueprint for confidential computing at the edge.
Okay. Do you think that one would be
probably
ready
remove
for
the second
what's
one
that?
as well? You could probably remove the second bullet, just saying.
Yeah, that's what I was just saying. This one is the one that we just
Okay,
did.
yeah, sure.
So
Dave, I'm also wondering on future topics, and again, I haven't been on the TAC meetings until fairly recently, so excuse my ignorance. I was wondering if any discussion has taken place of basically multi-component machines, right? So we talked about how you can have T's on your CPU, GPU, on your peripheral devices, and how all of this figures into, trust that one can place in the system from the outside, and also trust as established by T's on the same machine with respect to each other.
Can I please
IETF,
request that this does happen?
In the IETF, there's been discussions. I don't think we've had discussions in the TAC. And the IETF, that's the concept that the RATS architecture calls a composite device. One with multiple TEs in the same physical enclosure in different places. And so the RATS architecture has this. And so it's come up when we did the RATS architecture tech talk in like one slide. But beyond that, the answer is no.
But I think we need to understand how to divide and conquer this one, and then there's a lot of really good work. Like for instance, the PCI SIG working group working on how to overlay secure channels between T's on a PCI bus. I think I read that spec, and I think they've done phenomenal work. But I don't know how many other members of the TAC have actually followed that, right?
You are offering to present this, right, Mark? Please, because I'd love it if you would.
Yeah, I suppose I could. I mean, I don't know. Let's agree on exactly what it would contain, but I can certainly present an overview of the PCI SIG working group, and I think others would be more qualified to talk about RATs.
Yeah,
I mean, it sounds like it's one where if someone maybe wants to put together a list of the discussion topics around it and lead that.
Yeah, and by the way, I wouldn't put PCI SIG as the prefix, because that's for that's how components interact within a multi-component device.
Not
right?
necessarily,
Then,
no.
Oh,
There's
really?
many different types of multi-component machines. The RATS discussion came up. The first example in RATS had to do with routers, right, where each line card had a separate TEE in it, and so whether it's PCI or some other bus, it doesn't have to be PCI. That's just the dominant one.
I'm not sure I'd even go with machines, because you might want to talk about what are they called? Those the big ones. I mean, maybe systems or hardware or something like that.
Still, they're typically within one large chassis.
Well, again, do we want to say that's? Do we want to scope it to that small? We might want to go broader,
Well,
and that's, I think, part of the interesting question.
At some point, you have to draw a distinction, because at the other end of the spectrum, you have like what Steve was talking about in his presentation. You have a confidential cloud, and of course, you have many different, say, confidential VMs, and those are all different, processes.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. Trust frameworks and trust domains. Indeed. So I think that's one of the things. Where do you end that scoping? I think it's a really interesting question. That's all.
So anyway, I heard potential voluntold for Mark. I don't know if volunteer, but and so I put these two on there. And so my question is, so Thomas, your suggestion there, would that be ready for the next meeting or 2 meetings out? How much time for scheduling would that one need?
So I talked to the guys that would be presenting this, and they said the first date is available for them is the 30th of June. I think. Yeah.
Okay. And then Mark, how much, if it was you,
Specifically
how
on
much time would you need to prep for this one?
Specifically for PCI SIG,
Yeah.
let me pull up my calendar real quick and take a look
Specifically
at
for PCI
what's going on. So we're on the 2-week cadence, if I remember
Correct.
correctly.
Right,
Okay.
so this would be like June 2nd, June 16th, or June
June
30th.
2nd is fine. I can do June 2nd.
June 2nd. All right, so we have one potential for next one specific to PCI SIG, right?
Certainly, yeah. I'll throw together a deck.
Yeah. It might also be useful if Eric, do you know whether you or somebody else that could talk about the router designs that led to the RATS discussions?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about that.
By routers, do you mean, and by the way, again, I do not know if this has been discussed, but the presence of various forms of reverse proxies, web application firewalls, load balancers, and how they mix with the trust execution environments and communications. Also in that bucket would be traffic shapers, sidecars. Like that would be a really fun one to kind of put up in one discussion.
I think we've had discussions on this before. I know I've talked about it. Certainly what you're talking about is part of my day job. So the question of how deep do you want to go in the various areas?
Well, so for instance, I think if we have all these cloud providers, right? So we have all the public clouds and whatnot. We have people doing orchestration work, and basically how traffic flows between components, especially through these, that would have to become trusted intermediaries. I think this is something that we need to have a very, very good, understanding in our community, and I think it has to be well documented.
I don't know if all the answers are there, because basically you have to pass enough information between the subsystem components to have an understanding that you can assert the entire set of devices as being secure. So as soon as you get into multi-TE systems, we've really not done sufficient work at talking about how to reflect the state of an aggregate subsystem as one off the device.
So I present one approach to this in my book. Sorry to mention it, but chapter 12, trust domains. Again, I'm not saying that's the only way of doing it or that's all right. It's a discussion, intends to be a discussion. So that's another way of looking at it. Again, it's not all the questions. Answers, yes. Thank you, Dave. But it's relevant, so. Sorry.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff. Do you do it centralized? Can you do it distributed? Who's the authority for the system? How do you trust that it's working properly? There's a lot of hard problems in here that is future work that, as far as I know, hasn't been given a way of exposing that view in a consistent way outside the domain.
Well, that's exactly what that chapter tries to address. And raises the questions, not answering them, but at least raising some of the questions.
Absolutely.
All right, so we've got one for next week, not next week, next meeting. Thank you, Mark, for being willing to go with only 2 weeks of notice. And we'll come back to the other ones after that. The rest of you are not off the hook, but I did have one last topic under any other business here, which was a topic to follow up from a previous meeting. When Mark gave his tech talk about the governance, we said, hey, what are the next action items? And there was a couple people, and I don't remember who, because the question was, do we want to do a SIG, a white paper, or some other action we want to do to follow up on the governance related topic, meaning not the other definition of governance, right? And so there was a couple people, I don't remember who, that were interested in that topic. And so I wanted to make sure that was still, but it wasn't on our action item slide, right? And so I either want to put it on the action item slide or give people a chance to report back, because Mark was asking me, what is the next step? Is there anything that we need to do or whatever? And so I want to throw that back out to the rest of the of you all to say, is there things that we should do on governance? Do we want to keep it as an action item? Because I think there were at least 2 or 3 people, some of you on this call, I think, that had thoughts or wanted to think about it.
I was one of them. Yeah.
Yep. I know it was Mark and Thomas, and at least I think 2 other people said they were involved in that, and I don't remember who they were. Maybe Jethro was one of them, and Jethro is not on the call right now. I don't remember, but maybe Kurt, if you can help me dig out from the past minutes, it was in the meeting that Mark talked in. But I want to encourage that subgroup of people to continue talking, or at least to start talking if that hasn't happened yet. And let's keep that action item on there. So since it is an important topic, so.
I think best if we could maybe break it down a little bit. So for instance, like what Mike talked about today is very much part of what was in my governance talk, when I basically said that we need ubiquitous logging of everything, because you can't really make, convince yourself that the system is operating correctly unless you actually have visibility, and visibility brings risks. So this is where I am, saying that we're probably already talking about it, but I think, I raised in my presentation, and if you don't have a copy of my deck, I'm sure I can send it around, that I raised a number of points, and these can be addressed by one by one, and probably augmented. I probably didn't catch everything.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of that, we said there's a whole spectrum of things the tech could do, from just the tech talk to a white paper to a SIG on the other end of the spectrum, in terms of how much work is there that we want to do in this area. And that's why we wanted this subgroup of people to come back and say, what do they think the right level of engagement and work is necessary? Right at the far end of the spectrum, if there was a huge amount of work that we needed to do, then the logging, if there was a white paper or something based off of Mike's blog, whatever, that could be done by the SIG, but that maybe that's overkill, right? We're in the minimum viable governance is the mantra that we try to follow. And so what's the simplest thing we can do that would have the most impact is really what we're looking for recommendations. And so that's what I'm looking to the people who volunteered last time, some of whom are on the call, some of whom are not. So let's just keep that as an action item, put that on an action item next time on our action item slide, Kurt. But all right. Thanks all. We're about out of time now. So thank you all for being here. And unless there's any last comments, then I will go ahead and close the call. All right. Thanks all. Thanks, Mike. Great talk. And I don't know, Kurt, do you have Mike's slides already, or do you want Mike or I to send them to you?
Hey, yeah, I know I do not have them. If you could forward those, that'd be great.
If you have, I don't have Kurt's email to hand. Are you happy just to
All
forward
right.
it?
In that case, I'll take care of it.
Okay.
That's great. Thanks a lot. Cheers, folks.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Yep. Bye.